The word copyright and the phrase intellectual property and other related issues have gained or have acquired a sort of unsavory character. And because I know something about copyright, the benefit to the man, the individual, because I know of the benefit to the creator of words and creative ideas, because I know of the benefit to a nation, right? I am sort of put off by these uncharacteristic, unsavory remarks or connotations about copyright. How has this happened? How has copyright become a bad word?
But there are many reasons why copyright could have become a bad word in our situation, but I think it is due to a fear of compliance. Looking at it as I do from the international legal perspective, there are many, many issues that involve governments, international laws, and international relations, particularly in this time when we deal with the international intellectual property law and policy. And so those are the issues that governments sometimes are unable to face. They haven't the wherewithal, they don't have the human resources, or they just don't know how to approach it. Copyright is an important aspect in the world today. This is because so much of what we do has now gone into cyberspace. So much of the world economy focuses on the internet and internet relations and all of the issues that surround it. There's no way you can escape it. If you want to do international trade, you go via the internet. If you want to get into international consumer laws, it's via the internet. And because of that, the world economy has focused heavily these days. The intangibles are now out there in cyberspace, so you cannot avoid it.
There's no escape. So, one, are we fooling ourselves? Two, are there people who are competent to let us know what's happening and not sharing that knowledge? Three, are we totally turning our back on the issue?
There are people who are competent, and two, yes, those persons who are in public policy, who are your policy makers, are turning their backs on the issues because they don't know how to approach it. But there is no way that you can avoid it now.
No.
You had the incident in 2012 with the British booksellers and the Guyana government, and you saw the outcome. Things are changing. You're expected to change with it, and you're going to have to adjust pretty quickly to what is happening in terms of intellectual property. You shouldn't be afraid of intellectual property. In my role as WIPO consultant on Caribbean copyright, I have gone to countries and sat down with government officials to discuss how they will approach intellectual property, how they will approach copyright. And one of the things that I look at is what is happening on the ground. So you have public interest, and then you look at how you're going to create public policy. And from the public policy, you're going to decide how you're going to deal with regulations that suit your country's situation, as well as comply with international regimen, such as the WIPO arrangements and
That could
things
happen,
like that.
that you can prepare your own sets of rules and regulations to suit the World Organization?
In the sense that you do have some leverage. There are certain minimum standards that you will have to comply with. But what you do not want to do is to put the regulations in place without looking at how it will affect your country. But you don't want to ignore it entirely and behave as though you are a settlement on the moon because it's not going to work today. So you look at what will affect the circumstances and how you deal with it. Again, because the world economy is structured around intellectual property so much these days, your economic policies will have to take that into account. And what many countries have been doing is that they have been dealing with innovations Among other things, the Southeast Asian countries have invested heavily in research and development for innovation. So it's not a question of just sitting by and hoping that it will go away or begging for extra time. That's not going to work. Countries that are smaller than we
There's
are,
a current
that have
issue
gone
that we're
through...
begging for time.
Yes, we are begging for time. And begging for time is not going to work. There is no more time.
The
It no longer
internet
exists. We don't have time.
ensure
You
that
need to
there's
get
no
with
time.
the program or get off the program. It is not possible to get off the program, so you have to get with the program, or you'll be swept underneath all of it.
Approaches. Before we look at approaches, let's look at how important copyright is to the layperson. We must have an understanding of that, to the creator, and to government, the development of a country. 3 questions, 3 parts. Let us know, tell me, show us how it is important, what it will do for me.
First of all, you need a cumulative policy which allows you to understand what copyright is all about and why it's important to you. If your writers do not write, then you do not enjoy books. If your songwriters don't produce, then you don't have entertainment. If your actors and your playwrights don't come up with ideas, then we lose parts of our culture. You have to remember always that our culture is documented by writers. Some of our consciousness is created by people who think about things like that and develop cultural awareness. What do we do for them? Take their works, give them nothing, and then let them go. It takes a lot to be a writer.
So what I'm getting from you, if there's nothing in it for me as a writer, a singer, a dramatist, then I would not produce.
You probably
And-
would, but it is better that we respect those persons and allow them to make a livelihood so that our culture and our national consciousness can flourish. Now, as to what happens on the ground, what I have been doing and what I like to do is to walk among the people, go to the markets, see what's happening, see how people feel about things, just mingle.
Yeah.
And then you get an idea of what the public interest is before you can think about what public policy can become. And then, of course, to the other stages of what laws would help create good public measures. So it goes from one stage to the other, and then it comes all the way back down. If people don't buy in to the concept that this is important, well, then they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to be interested, and the whole project will fail. This is what happened in Kenya, where in order to comply with the World Trade Organization's TRIPS arrangement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights arrangement, they just put in a set of regulations, all the rules, only to find that they have had continuously to go back and revisit and take out and patch and fix because it doesn't work.
So you've got to do your groundwork first.
You have to do the groundwork first, and then you have to buy public interest.
And ensure there's a balance.
And ensure that there is a balance. So artists and creators, where you don't have your policy makers getting interested in this subject, have got to put it to them, but this is not good for our national livelihood. It's not good for anything.
I'm
You
getting
really
the feeling
need
that
to concentrate on that.
the onus is on us, the creator of words.
Well, unfortunately, it has to be on someone. So where someone does not take up responsibility, there will have to be some compromise or some compensation. So it has to start somewhere, and I say we need to focus on that quickly. So if you're in a family situation and someone's not pulling their weight, then someone has to compensate for that. In these circumstances, it's not going to go along the perfect route, so you have to take up a slack and make something happen. Where the government or governments are not cognizant of what is needed. In the Caribbean region, let me say quickly, it isn't that they are not cognizant of what is needed, they're unaware of how to go about it. This is where I come in and other consultants come in. So we help them to plan policies, to examine it from a scientific perspective. This is not guesswork. There is no guesswork in any of this. There are methods that are used to evaluate exactly what value copyright and other aspects of intellectual property rights have so that they will know how to incorporate it into their national economic plan. So it's a whole other issue. It's not just somebody jumping up and saying, oh, we want copyright, and somebody saying, no, we're not going to give you copyright, because if we do that, then people will not be able to buy school books for their children. That is a very basic, very uninformed level. It doesn't work that way. It can't work that way anymore. So there's no point in government ministers and so on avoiding the issue. If you avoid it, then the diplomatic community is going to put pressure on you, and you'll be in circles all the time. You have got to get with it. It is as simple as that.
We are part of the Caribbean. So our country ought to be cognizant of what's happening in the Caribbean. The movement that you are a part of in the Caribbean, is this movement broadcast towards Guyana, Guyana included? Guyana knows what's happening?
The thing is that I work with the World Intellectual Property Organization, and they only operate on the basis of invitation. So countries will have to invite them to give some advice, and that is how it works. So there's no assertion. If you want the advice, you're going to get it. If you don't want it, well, it's not going to be forced on you. What I have said continuously is that CARICOM needs to take responsibility for intellectual property Caribbean-wide. It is too great an issue for them to ignore. The European Union has got it together. They have got directives, they've got policies, they've got plans. As an international grouping of countries, you need to have that in place, or else you're wasting time. I don't see how the Caribbean single market and economy is going to succeed at all if we fail to deal with intellectual property. It is huge. There's no escape.
You mentioned blocks of isms or areas being able to do something. You mentioned the EU. In the same breath, you mentioned CARICOM, which has been over 30 years, almost 40 years in existence. How come CARICOM, after all these many years, were not with all the resources at their fingertips? Resources meaning the number of writers we've produced, 3 Nobel laureates in literature and other fields, right? How come, and other intellectuals, how come we weren't able to move in this direction? And I know, and you know, there are some countries who have made a move, right? How come the community has not moved?
It is a question that I have asked, and I have examined it in scholarly journals, because it is fascinating to me that they would sit there and not consider this huge, cutting-edge, technologically advanced,
You say fascinating,
legally
it's not
advanced.
fascinating.
It is fascinating. It is fascinating. The world is moving forward in law and technology, and they're sitting there probably not understanding that you cannot be marketed forever as sun, sand, and sea, but you have got to do things that will help the region to have a better voice, a stronger voice, even in negotiations at certain fora. When you sit in the United Nations General Assembly and you listen to these countries, the General Assembly, in some select meetings, and you get a chance to hear what goes on in negotiations, size matters.
Yes.
So you cannot jump up as an individual country and say, oh, we're going to do our thing. Nobody's going to listen to you. You wouldn't even get past the first round. So it's important that people pay attention to international intellectual property. It's not a homegrown thing anymore. It's not that you can do your thing individually as you please and beg for time and behave as though you're a settlement in outer space. We can't do that anymore, and it's becoming critical.
Some of the blame, I mean, you're working for the Caribbean region,
I am.
technically advising them. So we can point our finger to you as someone to blame for inability in action, slow movement towards realizing what we should do?
Not at all. You have to blame your policymakers who don't listen to me. And let me tell you something. I was invited by WIPO to speak on this issue before becoming involved with them in an advanced way. CARICOM heard me and they ignored it.
No.
So it is your policymakers that you have to blame. People who are not interested enough in the subject and perhaps who can't see what is going on. People like me, we engage in scholarly investigations. We don't just jump up and down and make a whole lot of noises. Everything is done in a systematic manner. It has to be peer-reviewed. It is internationally recognized. It has to be able to stand up to international scrutiny. Everything that I do has to stand up to international scrutiny or else it won't work. You'll just be another joker making a set of noise. So that won't cut it. They need to listen.
I'm sorry, I'll point the finger back this way as we turn to you not making noise only, but you've actually put your thoughts down on paper in a number of publications. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Essays in Caribbean law and policy, and the other one is on copyright. This is my pet subject. I like to see my leaders. I like to see leaders holding their own in front of an audience. Public speaking skills. Tips to becoming a competent presenter. I love that. I love when a leader of my country